Cricketlicious. Cricketlicious. Are we eating crickets for lunch, folks? Why aren't we eating the crickets for lunch? There's just so many of them. We just get fat and happy. And we're told they're high in protein, but they lied to that about that as well. So these crickets are maybe cute and they may sound nice. They actually may be thermometers in a narrow range of temperature. But otherwise, they're very small place in the world. And that's what the people in the seats of decision, all the psychopaths, determine they need from you, is that you become just like the cricket. Just like the cricket. Just not even paying attention, more than to stop making noise when the danger comes. So you're not even that effective to even make the noise behind your legs. You're making no noise. And this is what they're setting up in us. The clues are all around us that we should stop being that cricket. We should destroy the cricket within and respond. And in some regard, I really have a hard time getting beyond that. If we're not going to engage whatever is up against us, or whatever excuse it is, again, it's not an opinion, my mere opinion that we've got problems that are causing our hardships today. If we're not going to address that, first of all, we're done. It's that simple. And those of us that don't address it or try to or do something to interfere with it, at least, while we're calling for help, you end up being part of that problem that's going to overwhelm us. Why? Because the silence against that oppression is going to win. It will be ineffectual against the oppressor. And so in large part you become the problem. And yet we all complain without really doing anything substantial. That really has to stop. So I go through behind the woodshed here. We try to give a lot of information that prepares you for the future. Prepares you, and I mean like in the next future, like right after you finish listening to the broadcast. There should be something that maybe torques you just enough that says, well, I'm gonna go look into that. I'm gonna try and make a difference in this arena, in this area. You don't really need to know everything I know. You just need to have a heart in you that cares and a spirit of fight to stop wrongs. It can't come with an excuse at all. In fact, you can go out and do completely wrong if you're willing to learn, and you'll teach yourself how to go better and then more righter and get more done. More done than doing nothing or complaining. And so there's a little bit of costs that come with this, as there's nothing for free, if you will. And so that has to be factored in. But the whole point is it worth it? I don't know. Maybe I'm a little more sensitive than most people. I really do not. I despise. I don't know if it's a hate. I don't know. Really, somehow my emotions for all this are really not that high. This is just it's a consequence of a reality that has to be dealt with. I don't have time for that emotional part. I've made my decision that it wasn't good enough, what we're having to fight and what we're fighting. Notwithstanding we weren't supposed to, but that's not the point. That is the point, actually, but it's not the point of what we make our decision on. I've decided that I'm going to do something, and it's to a very high degree. That's the decision I know everyone has to make. And then for those of you that do, I don't see a question. I don't see a question. I see you just starting to pick up where you think you can. It is not even a decision you have to make. And for those of you on past cast, the reference for the content today will be BTW RLM 172. BTW RLM 172 all together in a search engine should in the future find the content page for all the links I'll be going through. The ones I get to. And as a reference, I was just thinking about who I work with, and even the people I've never met, or the people, anybody who just jumps in. And I just want to give my thanks to Vince Easley. It's not so easily what he's doing, but he's taking the time to go back and read. I'm humbled and embarrassed at the same time that someone would take that much time to go back and listen to my broadcast, but I do know that they're valid reality information that's usable stuff to you. That he's going back and he's going to listen, and I guess he's taken to heart the question I have is, do people really listen? And he's assembling for himself, and he jumps into the blogcaster pages and he puts comments, and some of them have links to more information, which I appreciate. And that's all for all y'all to go read as well what he's doing, and he's compiling. But he's decided to take a step back apparently and review a lot of this thing. And I'm asking I feel a little bit under the gun here to be his scrutiny. I value anybody who jumps in, their opinion. We may have a difference, and that can be worked out once we get the basis. That's not the point. Is that now I'm under the scrutiny, so all of a sudden there's one more I know is working to find a failure, and that's okay. It's just that I don't want to be telling people wrong, and that's going to be the proof. Is there stuff that ends up being wrong, and after it's been discussed, so we have a full understanding of how it all applies. I hear lots of people talking about terminology and dictionary terms and legal this and law that, and yes, you hear me talk about it, but you talk about me applying the languages as they are used and where they're used. You have an understanding on the one side that's not in one jurisdiction or in one arena or whatever you want to talk about it, where it is, and you have them in a different area. Like I've told you, if you look in a dictionary and there's 8 meanings, I suggest to you to think of them in terms of jurisdiction. Different subject matter areas that they cover is what I consider a jurisdiction, of subject matter jurisdiction. And so I relate everything, it seems, into a court type of thing. Why? Because we need law, and the courts are where you get your remedy in the society that we've created for ourselves. And I think that's fair enough. Who's taken over those courts, that's a whole different thing. Who's been doing so-called enforcement is a whole different thing. The purposes for which they're doing it is a whole different thing. And this is why we have to understand clearly what we're up against. Why I suggest to you strongly that when you find that things aren't looking like you were told, you need to step back and reassess what's going on. So Vince has taken that on to himself. I haven't talked to Vince. I don't, and in fact, there's so many emails that I get that I notice he's making comments into the Blogcaster page that tells me someone's making a comment. I just can't get to all he's doing. He's decided to do that for himself. I appreciate that. And he's also going to the YouTube, and now I understand, and I noticed when I went there on a link that I got, I think he sent through Freedom's Network, that he's reposting certain aspects of my broadcast, which in one of the chats I asked him, if you go through and you hear something that's really powerful, or you think that people need to hear currently, would you please point that out? Well, he did better than that. He decided to go ahead and post those parts, at least direct you in YouTube on the RLM Real Liberty Media YouTube page, the archives there for all of the broadcasts that are there. He went back and he's making titles and things for me. So thank you, Vince, for doing all that. But I'm suggesting this only to say, I haven't talked with Vince to tell him this is what he needs to do. He's decided that for himself, and he's taken his energy to help me to get the word out. That's, again, humbling. But I know it's required. So, and I've asked for that help. So he's decided to do that for me. It didn't have to be directed toward the broadcast to promote the broadcast, as far as getting the word out of what is being said here. That's his decision. But he engaged. He decided to engage where he thought he could. That's all I'm asking people to do. It doesn't have to be where I go. But I'm talking about the people I work with. That just happens to be what I've come through, which has given me the vast insight and comprehension that I can get. I believe I have that's accurate. And so, again, a third time, thank you, Vince, for engaging. Just doing that I don't even have a chance to keep up, and it's just someone doing something else. I can't appreciate that more. That's his life as well, putting time toward what my product, if I can call it that, is. My gift, if I can say that as well. My donation to you all. You can accept that, or you can leave it on the table, I suppose. Although I feel, folks, it's not a feeling. I can see it. We're dealing in it. We are in a war. There's no doubt about it in my mind, and anybody can make an excuse. They can make all kinds of answers about how much they need to know to be able to analyze a little bit more, to give it the proper name to call it before they go club it in the head. Folks, I'm so far beyond that, it may be scary. It really may be scary, because it's put my mind into a place I don't even recognize stuff in a way. I'm realizing I look around and I don't recognize that. I see jokes going through the chats with pictures, and I don't even understand what they're talking about here. Political stuff necessarily, usually. I'm focused on a very narrow area, but happens to address fundamental things in life, like water and land and your private and your travel and your private property of yourself. And it happens to deal in international law. And if I get to the tabs, we're going to hear that today. And I see in the nudist, yes, exactly, a new word, folks, the nudist. Not the nudists, not the naked bare bodies. And this is the news that's noticed. The news that's noticed to you is the notice from the occupier of what you're up against. Whether that's the truth or whether that's not, it's up to you to determine, and that's the big problem. Proves, the existence of which proves you can't believe you live in the place you were told you live if you think you had any measure of liberty. I mean liberty in the negative sense here. You don't even have that. And we're going to find some of that out today in the tabs. I told you a long time back some things. I said you're going to come to a time when you can't even do the law. Well, because I found that out in 25. That was finally answered to me in 2005. You cannot even do the law and be lawful. They won't make you they won't allow you to be legal either. And so that very well cinched it for me, and I started looking at I looked at my whole paradigm that I thought was going on, the 2 dimes I was rubbing in my pocket. The one fell out through Obama eventually. Yeah, that was coming. And you find out you're not in control of your reality, and you find out you're not in control of your own actions, because there's people that we have let to say things against us. And so I hear all these people also, not hear all, but I hear lots of people having trouble, and it's in the face of a corrupt, organized criminal syndicate. We say nothing. We engage them instead of fighting them tooth and nail for as long as it takes. We make excuses to go elsewhere instead of fighting that. And as I've said, if we would just gang up on them, become our own gang, and fight them at every point, and with the technology I've figured out, do it even more vigorously in ways that I haven't seen done before, that it really gets in their face that we are using. Thousands of us doing this in all places, in all venues that these occupiers take us, will gum up the work so bad they won't even know what to do. In every moment that you're doing this, you're becoming another witness and evidence of the crime against you. So, there's a group of officers that are calling out the problem. So here's maybe not all boys in blue are bad. I'm not going to jump to the absolute on all this. I don't like what the police have turned into, but at one time they were a whole lot more peaceable, and we could have been there to make them even more peaceable. And we haven't. And I just saw coming through one of the chats something about I think in Colorado, there's a bill now pending that says that the cops can be fined for beating on anybody that films a cop, $15,000 or whatever. Well, that's more of what I've been suggesting, folks, and I don't know who suggested that and what caused them to think that way, but remember, I've told you, stop giving the power to government, start putting remedy in the hands of people. And we don't do that. We have the power to do that, and we don't. I've been astonished for 2 decades, literally, because one decade it took me to orient myself of what was going on and strip myself of all the prejudices I'd been filled with and inculcated with about what I was living through. And then the last 20 was looking around and saying, well, we have lots of tools and no one's using hardly any of them. And there's really lots, and it's really there only for our entertainment, but in fact I've realized that they're not just entertainment when you put them to use as witnesses against the criminal element that's been formed up around you. And so we'll get into the military aspect of this as well today. But it's consistent. It's always consistent. And this is what keeps me thinking that I've got the right view on this. I have the right interpretation. For as comprehensive and multidimensional as it is, there's not a whole lot that is escaping this preference, if I can say it that way, in the categories of possibilities and the way what we live through. In fact, I'm really listening close now because I stuck my head out a little bit, in the turtle shell I've got. I took my head out last week on the Erdogan thing, and the more I'm listening, the more I don't, for even taking it from social media, but working real hard to keep on the message of the truth that was coming from people around the globe, literally. I think I nailed that down pretty good so far. And it's not what the experts are really saying. In fact, they're all surprised, aren't they? And so, not to say that I have a better insight, I'm just saying that there's a way to look through stuff to give you a better anticipation in the world that empowers you to beyond what you've ever thought. I guess that's what I want to point out here. What I'm suggesting for you to understand. However right and wrong I'm doing it. However the method is it's coming out of this speaker from to your ear. The stuff I'm telling you that I'm applying works. It works to destabilize, to surprise, to keep people off balance that are not good. And it only affects those that are not good. And that's the interesting part. Everything that everyone wants to make up about all this is really destroyed. The nonsense is destroyed in the truth. Once you apply this to a wrongdoer, they're caught. And no one's figured out how to really do that. And I've come every week to try and bring it out. A lot of it's just making the proper discussion in the proper form. Yes, we have to get formalized. The proper form in order to make people understand. And then you find out when you make simple statements that people don't understand, you're either looking at the literal clueless and completely ignorant, no matter how intelligent they think they are, or you're looking at someone who's a criminal, who just denies their criminality. And that's really the worst type. But that's really fast to take that on. I mean, when you go and talk, you're directed by a state agency to go talk to an attorney, and that attorney says, "I've read your paper, but I can't talk to you about it before I get permission from a client who happens to be the state agency who's directed you to that attorney." You know that you're dealing with criminals. And so that's a much better position than to have the government on your neck, having judgments against you, ruining your life, worrying about the next complaint against you because you have some probation condition you have to worry about because they've stuck you on the long leash under their legal system because we were all too ignorant to figure out how to address it to keep the jurisdiction from attaching to us. And while I appreciate everyone doing the word study, it's very important. The application of your word study is very specific, and it's not much of anything I hear going on. You can't, sitting in knowledge of a word study that's not applicable to a jurisdiction who's coming after you is not going to help you. You're right, you know all about it, but it's not going to help you. And so we have complaints that we can make, and we hope the people inside the system that was established, then they're empowered to do this. You hope that they aren't the criminal and they step up and they do complain. Well, last week I got to the point where I came up to this report, and I'll start from here this week and try and move this thing along to show you how this thing works on through. It's a good story and a bad story wrapped all in one. We have what do we have here? It's really the dual life that we live. There's the good stuff we can see, and there's the bad stuff that comes along with it, with the yin and yang. And so understand that's what I try and speak to as well when I'm looking at all these things. But last week I was going to report that a week before, and boy, these stories are coming faster than I can keep up. I told you that I was feeling the breath of the notice on us and how everyone's picking it up on my neck. I can't, if I don't get to something now, the week I find it, a week before actually, and talk about it, boy, it's hitting everywhere then. So, but it doesn't, I also notice I listen very carefully. Not many people will interpret it the way I'm interpreting it. So I still have something to offer even late. But folks, the news is coming at us so fast, and this is part of the plan, that it's just like, well, I don't want to say what I just crossed my mind, but it's like, it's just like going too fast and going through maybe going down the highway in a convertible or a motorcycle, and you go through a big bug storm. That's what it feels like, trying to get through all this stuff and try to make sense of and points that we can use. So, a group of police officers speak out on how corrupt the system is. I look at this and say, great, I hope these are people who are true. I don't know what the systemic thing is here, but yes, it is corrupt. So here's evidence for those of you that are working it. I would take this and just start moving this along. Verify that this is actually the truth, that a group of officers have chosen to speak out about the blatant corruption of their police departments. Now, we all say, yeah, they're all corrupt, but I'm saying take this knowledge of people that are saying that they're testimony, if you will, reduce it, make it testimony, actually, make it evidence, and confront the people around you that are the same way. Don't just say, yeah, the cops are corrupt, and shut up. Do something about it. So here's an example that comes to me to tell you, here's some officers, their police department was very unhappy about their message, which I'd assume was to be expected. And I would say no doubt. All right, so here's a link that says that these cops, and you can track it down, you can figure out the validity of it. I'm just saying there's people in the system that are fed up. Now, they may not be fed up and corrupt. Their line of corruption may fall a lot short than mine would inside that system. But if we have the people, the boys in blue that are coming out, and they have to come out as a group, remember, and even that, it's going to be difficult. There should be some support to ferret that out and get those things that are the corruption thrown down, made accountable. That's going to be another thing you're going to find out that's a lot of trouble. I've been telling you that problem for 2 years now. The accountability portion is what we're needing. We're needing badly. Actual accountability. It's there, but when the system is you're full of occupiers, they're all working in cahoots. You're not going to get that kind of action. So you have to look for very particular things that allow you to act and not give it over to the government. And when the government has made it so that they're the only ones that can act, like I've done and we have done in the past, you call it out as an infringement of the Constitution to limit your right of redress. There's constitutions that say every man has a remedy for harm done him. That would include women. But let's not. I always have. Well, I don't know why I always have to say that. But maybe we can get to the point where I can just say the men, and we know the women are included, because that's the other aberration about all this. Women are treated as men, and this is the big joke behind the scenes that they all know this. And then on top of that, there are no men or women. Remember that. See, be careful on even locking into what I just said. In legal, there is no person with a gender. It's gender neutral. The person is actually a legal entity, is what they're actually saying. Person has no gender. So, as I've told you before, all this gender identity nonsense, it's not legal. It can't even be viewed in the legal arena. Why it's coming out is kind of fascinating, that no one shuts it down. There is no there's no legality behind a gender identity. And how that has to do with sex, I don't know. Why they convolute this is only to convolute your mind and confuse you. Anyway, so getting on back to the point of the cops. The cops are saying the systems is corrupt, and we go, no duh. I'm saying here's 4 guys that may need your help in their area, and that you can take, if you're not in that area, the fact that they're speaking out, and then you find your area, and you apply what they're saying to where you are, and you're going to be right on. You have now someone's opinion that they will be recognized because they won't recognize yours. If you've ever tried to do this and gotten that, you've also then received the notice that you don't matter. And you don't matter until you get a big gang of you coming on the same cause that's correct, the correct cause. Otherwise, they deem you to be the tinfoil hat wearing types, or terrorists, or whatever name they want to throw at you. So a group of cop officers speak out. I wanted to point this out last week as we were on a continuum, interrupted by time, that these are the types of things that we need to engage. Listen for these anomalies in the system and engage them where we can. Otherwise, it takes a lot more work to develop the facts, like we had to do over the last 6 months with the local government, the local courts, the bar association members called judges, the trial court administrator, even the sheriff himself is all part of a criminal cabal that's causing the trouble by not being who they really are. They just use these colors of authority to cover their crime. That's in every place I've looked, that's theft by extortion. And it's felony, and it's felony coercion. And when you go look very carefully at the federal statutes, it's like a 18 U.S.C. 241 and 242 violation. It's also a U.S.C. Title 42 so-called civil rights violation. They do this all the time. And the system courts are sitting there to be the pressure valve to make you think you have a remedy. Why I told you back in 2013 I figured out how to take the courts out. Because I always get, every time I say this in the chats, I get the really intelligent people who will be really researching this hard. They're saying, well, why do you go to the oppressor to get justice? Well, you don't. You take them out. I don't mean you take them out. You take them out of their function. You take them out of the paper. The Civil War is on paper now. You take them out of the battlefield. And for those of you that want to just see the existence of it, though you won't find the files because they've covered those up, JeffersonMiningDistrict.com versus Kitzhaber, 2013. You find the evidence of it on the Justia site, and look for the docket, and you'll see some paperwork was filed. And if you understand what you're looking at with those paperwork that are filed, if they're still listed, you understand what those papers do, you'll understand we took out the system and it agreed that it's the criminal enterprise that it appears to be when you have the eyes to see it, and not just a complaining mouth. We can all complain. Okay, now what? I guess not many people else feel there's an obligation to do something about it, and that's been trained into us as well. So not only are there some complainers going on, but interestingly, at the time I found this was the Dallas shooting. I don't want to get all that, just the fact of at that time, then all of a sudden the Dallas Police Association says that low pay and morale are triggering several police resignations, and this was 50 officers resigned in 1 month in to take jobs in northern Texas cities coming out of Dallas, the same place where there was that shooting at the same time. There's internal problems. Now, whether or not those were the people, the rats fleeing the ship, or whether those were the people that said, I'm not gonna ruin my career by being as bold as the first group of this first group of cops that are going to tell you that there's a problem, there's a corruption in the system, and can tell you what it is and has the evidence to do so. You can jump in behind that if they have evidence. You can become a collateral help to gather and a gathering of that evidence, and maybe even become an investigative reporter to compile the evidence in an orderly fashion so other people can see it. But in Dallas, Texas, they're just fleeing, whether the rats of the ship fleeing the setup, the setup of the Dallas shooting, or they're just not taking it anymore and they don't want to band together to call out corruption, and they're just going to go to a smaller place. I don't know, but in the same week of the Dallas shooting was this mass exodus, quite a large, they're saying. It's unprecedented as well. Won't read the story. I'm just pointing out there's things afoot inside the government institutions here. For some reason, people and cops there's a shifting going on. Now, I'm saying that when they get this kind of chaos going on, you can step into that chaos and start pulling out what you might need that you may not otherwise get. In fact, I can't remember what the suggestion was there'd be a great time for an investigative journalist to contact and try to track down all these people, these cops that resigned, and go find them and go ask them. Maybe even ask them about the Dallas shooting and see what their response is. Just be there in their presence to see what their response is. See if you can feel whether they're the rat fleeing the ship or whether they're just a good guy that just wants to be a cop. If I can say that cops can be good guys this day, please give me some room here. I would like to see that we can bring that back and that they are peace officers. I really do see that they could be that role. They've been trained, and we were told it was coming way back about, if I remember right, about the late 70s where the training things were coming on. They take a change in attitude. That's where I started to see it by the 80s. I was seeing the change in attitude. So this has been a long time coming. It's going to take possibly a long time going back, but not quite so fast, quite so long, because I think when you get directed to it, you know what the problem is, you know where they did it right, you know where they did it wrong. We can pull this thing back and tone down this problem that we have in this country that's being fostered and encouraged enough that we see cops fleeing, whether they're, like I said, flat rats fleeing the ship because they're guilty and they don't want to be caught. I don't know, but I want to keep it on the higher level until an investigative reporter jumps down there into the North Texas area and finds out these cops were actually moving because they just couldn't stand the corruption anymore. That could be a whole nother body of evidence for people to pick up and step in and do what has to be done to stop the nonsense of division that's going on in this country, to keep us divided, looking at ourselves, and not get anything accomplished in the way we need to, as the people need to have. Again, the Republic, if you can keep it, is it was our mandate, if you will. And there's been quite a long many years that there has been a number of groups that have come in, encroached, and altered the countryside to fit their needs, and that's a definition of an occupying force under international law. So the cops, they're corrupt, and again, all this comes in the same week. I mean, we can. It just always fascinates me how these reports come in the same week, and if you look at them in a continuum, they're telling us all the time. This is the so-called propaganda is actually telling you the truth in the news sector, which is the notice sector for the occupying force. which is has many faces. Politics, I guess I can do it that way as well. But so the corruption sits there, and we can just say it's there and then blow it off, or we can take it to task. So there's an interesting little story that pops up. That when I read it, I chuckled because I didn't understand how this would even be possible. But at any rate, it was hitting the news, and it went through the Twitter sphere, and I went through I understand Facebook picked it. I mean, everyone picks this stuff up. I want people to pick this stuff up and I went through the emails too. Pick it up and do something with it. Quit sending it on. Look at this stuff and say, okay, what can I do with this? Find something that interests you enough to go do something about it. But Colorado town finds THC in its water, warns residents not to drink or bathe in it. Now, being in this land use stuff, dealing with the federal agencies, state and federal enough, looking at the so-called science they use and who they use to do the tests, and as a grantee minor, not a minor, a minor, more major than you can understand, am of capacity, being one of capacity, and having to at times, or at least my friends, having to go do assays for what we have in the mineral content of our rock. It's very, very difficult because the government doesn't have labs anymore that can actually do the work that we need, surprisingly, with all our technology. In fact, they use international standards that are based in commerce and not production. In other words, a miner wants to know the elements in the rock. He doesn't want to know the assay content for valuation of commerce. And all the labs are certified to the international standards. So we're all controlled without even knowing it, how this works. But remember, whatever you're doing in your life, most of it was provided by a miner somewhere. If you aren't eating it, you aren't growing it, you're having to dig it out of the ground. So it's out of the rock to you. As a colleague just said, he wants to make another video because we can't find the original that was so powerful to explain about everything you deal with. It comes from a miner somewhere, whether they be slave or property slave, one or the other. Colorado town finds THC in the water was the point of the clinical the laboratory testing. When I read that, I laughed. I said, "Well, the EPA is known for its frauds. I mean, so what is the joke here?" And then I said, "Well, THC." Immediately, I said, "Well, that's more of a resin compound. It's not soluble in water. Now what?" So this has got to be a bogus. I mean, if I didn't know better, it's an Onion story. But anyway, so they're playing it out, and it gets a lot of people all wilded out about it. This town. And this is in Colorado where they've legalized it. And again, if you listen to I think James Corbett, he's got a big blind spot about legalization. He apparently doesn't seem to believe that means regulation and taxation and control. But it is. And so we have a different little view behind Woodshed on how this works, and it works a little quicker so Colorado's legalized this plant that has a content of THC in it. Residents were warned to not drink or bathe in it because it came from the well that the water comes from the city was supposedly contaminated. This town on Colorado's eastern plains warned its residents not to drink, bathe, or cook with its tap water on Thursday because officials said the preliminary tests of the water came back positive for THC, the main psychoactive compound in marijuana. Here we go. Ooh, the big shaking of the walls. But what also fascinated me was that they talked about just having it on your skin was bad from their standpoint because you can absorb it right through your skin. Well, holy heck. Maybe that's an entry point for a medicine. Maybe they're just trying to scare us on the psychoactive properties so that we'll go right past the fact that you don't want to bathe in it, you don't want to drink it, you don't want to cook it because it might actually do something. But here's the point. I don't know how much marijuana you can put down a well in order to have it test in the water underneath the tests they have at the cops, unless it's the ones that they use that are fraudulent. The ones that they use are wrong, that are bad tests. And what's interesting about a year ago, and I have them on the tabs a long time ago, I never got to it, was the fact that these tests that they do to convict you are no good. And I said, well, these are just one of those tests. Residents are told to not even let their pets drink the water. Oh no, we don't want to have a sedated pet without cancer, do we? No, boy, this town of Yugo must be in Colorado must be really hurting big pharma. But anyway, so let's get on to the point here. They tested THC in the water. Well, okay, I'm scared now. But then the next report comes out that scientists looked at this and said the cops used faulty test kits to incite fear about THC in water supply. Scientists say it's impossible. I won't read. I'm just, again, these headlines are telling me a lot, but in the story, it talks to you and talks about the insolubility of THC, the compound, in water, which fits my initial thought. How did it get in the water? Well, they say it's impossible, and that's partly the reason. And they say that the amount that it had to be for that test to check, if it was a proper test that would be lawful, I mean, that would be actually truthful, couldn't have seen it anyway. That the amount of plant material they would have to put in here would have been, well, what a gift. I mean, it's beyond. So, immediately within a couple of days, the scientists come out and say it's impossible. So I'm back to this drug test. And a story I had before that I haven't got to that I'm going to get to today. The field drug tests, the $2 tool that can destroy lives. So, let's get it. What was my point about bringing this story up was that the government has lab and testing kits that are no good. Well, what does that mean? Okay, fine. Well, they tested THC. It's not really there, maybe. And if it is, maybe you should be drinking more of it. I don't know. I'm not into it. If you need it for health, use it. But it's a relevant story. The point is on these tests that they do. Why? Because they take these tests and they convict you. There's a thing in law that the legal is recognizing the law. It takes a long time to have a test be assumed as presumed correct in the courts for the purposes of evidence, and you got to go find that in the evidence provisions of the law. You have an evidence rules and codes in your state statutes, and also the feds have it. I can't remember now what it just slipped my mind where that's at. Might be Title 28 and Rules 100 or 200. I can't remember, but you'll find them. There's rules of evidence, and these are critical for you to understand as well. In fact, when I learned a handful of them, they were critical in the beginning of my engagement with the system on really keeping the other side in the state at bay and on its toes. Because you walk in and you have these basic knowledges, and they want to know where the heck where did you come from? Or they ask you if you're a lawyer. Not even the lawyers do this stuff, actually. They only do a few of them. You got to learn about 10, and then now you're outside the scope of even an attorney. And these small, and there's a lot more, but the handful of quality 10 are enough to stymie a lot of the condition against you. So if you know this is what I'm talking about, and I don't really talk about much, when you engage these people, you engage them not because of your opinion and what you think the Constitution's about. You engage them through the formal communication style that they listen for. Doesn't mean you'll always win, but your turnout, the outcome for you is completely altered over than certainly more than you saying, okay, I've done it, I'll pay you, and put the leash on, and now set a record for you to come and do it again in the future. But these field tests have been shown to be no good. And a Tech Dirt story long pile back, I'm getting to it. Field drug tests, a $2 tool that can destroy lives. It only takes $2 in a few minutes to ruin someone's life. Field tests for drugs are notoriously unreliable, and yet they're still considered to be evidence enough to deprive someone of their freedom and to start a chain of events that easily end in joblessness and or homelessness. Now, I mean, again, I could read all this. There's also others. Remember, this is all tied to a Commerce Act as well, a commercial act, and they put all the elements in the charges that said that you had, that the scales that you had meant commerce, that the little package that you had meant commerce, that what you were doing was a commerce. They have no probable cause for that, and nobody uses the rules of evidence or the procedures in the rules of procedures of the court to challenge every one of these things. And you just heard right here, they're considered, these field tests are considered evidence enough. Why? Because they're not challenged. And so for me, this story starting out with THC in the water, declared by the Sheriff's Department, was nothing more than the Sheriff's Department being corrupt and lying, for whatever reason. I don't need to get into it all. They're advancing and trying to advance a problem, and then it's going to bite them in the back end here, in the behind. Smart they're behind here, because you find out about these tests when you find out that the sheriff said that they tested 10 tests and they came back 6 with THC on something scientists says is impossible. You realize that at least 60% of their tests were no good, and those tests would have been used on somebody's blood or whatever, or their stash. I guess this is the direct stash stuff, on their stash to prove THC. It could have been oregano, I guess. But it would have proven out, and your life is ruined over this stuff. Now you might see why I'm interested in this story about THC. Otherwise, I have no concern for it being in the water. I tell you the truth, I could care less. Drink up. If you want it, if that's who you are. If not, I'm sorry. Boil the water. I don't know. Well, maybe you can't boil the water. You boil the water, it'll come off as a resin, and it'll get up in the distillate, so you can't do it that way either. What you can do is how you process it. You stick it and freeze it. When it settles out the bottom, then you pour off the top. How's that? So I give you a little bit of science distillation here. Why? Because it's not soluble in water. It falls out if it's there. And so these drug tests are death, and they're not challenged, and they continue to be used. And this is one of those evidences that in the story, in the notice to you, that these tests are unreliable. Tech Dirt came out. This is a long time ago they came out, and I had stories way before about these so-called things they call evidence that you have to be aware of, and you have to engage this beforehand, because once they use it on you or one you love, it's kind of over, because you don't understand how to defend yourself in that formalized system of plunder that they've set up for you. And so this was a story not about THC in the water. It was in the proving that these tests are no good. They're not reliable. By the sheriff's office own statement, at least 60% unreliable. On something that had to be fabricated because it's impossible. Lie after lie after lie. We all know that, right? Well, I'm asking you to take that knowledge, and now this is evidence, and you go in your local jurisdiction and you fight. You become the guy who one of you guys who got violated, or one of you gals got violated on this THC nonsense. You go fight to get your record thrown out, or reviewed, or reheard, to stick it back in their face. But they're utilizing and allowing, these judges are allowing this stuff to be utilized, and you can now, with the knowledge I give you, you can find out that it's set up, the corruption system of the Bar Association set up to take advantage of all this. In fact, you now have dereliction of duty on all the judicial officers, including your attorney, who's an officer of the court, who's also an agent of the state, an executive side. Figure that one out. Who had the duty, going on their oath, their duty to not allow that to happen. It's a whole different a set of addressments that they now are on the burden's on them now. So this is the THC in the water story for me, was me able to now bring up from way back the field test kit story that I had on tab quite a while ago, that these test kits are killing you. These evidences that are coming through technology are killing us. The labs that they use are known to be labs for corruption. In fact, there was an EPA story. They're paying labs to produce results that they need to have outcomes. These are the tests that they then go after property owners with. Evidence right here, folks. And so then I wanted to call you out in Michigan. Here it comes. They don't know. No one really pays attention to this stuff. They just let it go through. No one fights it. Remember now, you're talking about, you got me looking at this thing in two ways. You got the commercial aspect, which may be subject, and then you have the state does not want to tell you about your right to use the road without the commercial aspect that you have to divine and to get clarified. And so when you hear this story, you have to understand, when maybe I get to the end of the tab, we're going to have another type of discrimination thing that the courts have found, but I'm going to show you how it's related to this. It deals with voting, but it has to actually relate to this, that there is a silent fraud going on in front of everyone's face when you hear that Michigan's going total police state with roadside saliva checkpoints. So keep up the idea that they have a right under commerce, maybe in the regulated entity, to do so, but not necessarily the use of the highway laws. We then see later in a voting decision that happened, there's a discrimination, although they couch it in racial terms. Remember I've told you that in a Doubleday Dictionary 1974, if you find one, they're a short, stubby, thick dictionary, you go to the term race, the word race, and the example for the term race is the race of lawyers. Should tell you how legal-centric that dictionary is, and that a race is not necessarily color. It's any group you can identify separate. So this has been blown out as well. The race of lawyers is who's ruling your life. They've made these laws that deny, because they're in a corporate commerce sense, that deny the right of the people to their own highways, that they're going to impose this saliva check stops on the roadside. But you have to go fight this before you get out there. You have to bring these questions up. Let me put it more concise for you. I was criticized a bit by my brethren about how I wasn't concise on an argument on how to present a habeas, and I actually reminded him that I did say it, but apparently I talk so fast, those points get missed. You have the distinction, number one, you have the distinction between the commerce authority they may have, you can argue that split, and you have the right to use of the highway, which cannot be constrained because Congress didn't allow it, and all the states come in equal in the use of their highways as a pre-existing claim of possession by the people. If it's a pre-existing claim of possession, what's this corporate or state government coming to encroach upon your use by any means and testing you? Where was that reservation in the grant? But now we go to commerce, they might have a point. So you have to go and you have to put before the court the fact that you need to enjoin this program. It's probably a federal program on top of that violates Title 18, Section 31, Sub 10, being a motor vehicles is a vehicle used for the carriage of people and commerce or goods for profit. The proof, the law is all right here, folks. They're ignoring it completely to run this saliva checkpoint. Now, I'm not even to my point yet. I'm laying out, you have to make a declaratory judgment that their program is unlawful, unconstitutional, that it isn't restricted to commerce entities, and it denies your right to use your highways. Forget your right to travel. It's your right to use the highways. And it does so without probable cause in that context, because see, underneath the Commerce Code, you don't have to have probable cause. There's this anomaly called implied consent, which is really not so implied that if you say you didn't agree, that they have to then prove how you did. Remember that court case I told you about. So this is not so set in stone, but the Michigan government is going full total police state as described by this article. Regardless of your stance on drugs, I think most would agree the Michigan State Police has no right to run roadside saliva checkpoints. Okay, fine, that's an opinion. I'm saying reduce it to the law and go address that, because you're going to have to. Otherwise, you're coming up one day and you don't think it's much to give your saliva check, but they're going to take it. And you know about big data, that ain't ending there. And you know about the FBI the FBI database, and you know about how they create misdemeanors and how they will make you an enemy combatant because of a mere misdemeanor. This is not so simple to just turn your head anymore. So I'm not going to, again, there's so much to talk about. I need to just kind of skip along in a way. Now let me put it, one thing, here was the problem. I've talked about the problem with the test kits for marijuana. Let me read right out of the middle of the law. The pilot program is launched by the 5 Michigan counties this year, according to MLive report, which states a new law instructs state police to pick 5 counties where it will run a 1-year pilot program for saliva-based testing to check for drivers for drugs like marijuana, heroin, and cocaine. It's the same type of thing here, folks. And we already know that at least the state has a 60% failure rate on these. Are you going to chance yourself to that stop? Excuse me if I'm blunt here. What kind of a fool are you to do that without a say? The state law that allowed that and didn't constrain itself to a particular class of people in this classless society, which should tell you something, violated, it's an unconstitutional imposition. And where they agree they will use tests that can't be proven to be actually accurate 100% of the time. This is notice to you that they tell you this to give you the opportunity to not be silent. If you are, you will be subject to at least a 60% failure rate. And one group, and I won't go down to find it, someone did a test. I've seen the videos. They checked and they said if you've had chocolate in your system, you'll trigger. If you have Tylenol in your system, it'll trigger. Some group did this test right in front of the media and showed that these tests, not only are they wrong, they will trigger on things that you eat in your daily diet. Are you willing, now with this test pilot program, which is going to set up to try, listen, if it's 60% wrong in their favor, they're going to prove they need to do it. It gets worse from here. Not only are you destroyed, now they got a program to keep going after everybody, and they start to validate these tests with this Colorado story. As a joke as it is a serious notice for action here. So I'm trying not to do the news. I'm trying to show you this is evidence that you can use. Any one of you that drives a car, even I use the word advisedly, don't jump on me about saying driver. You are if you got a license. That's just it. You agreed to it. I didn't agree to that. You filled out the application, signed the dotted line at the bottom, or the line at the bottom said you agreed to come under the laws of the state for motor vehicle code regulation. You done that. You have what they call the stake in this outcome, and you are becoming subject. Now, while you're attacking this, and if you do it properly, you now gain the status that you're someone who does it right. Why don't you then follow up the momentum and then go after because impliedly in here I told you is your right to use the highway. Contrary, and despite the motor vehicle code, as a prior existing claim of possession, listen to my words, prior existing claim of possession over that use, the use of fruct. You don't own it privately, you own it in common, if I can say it, with everybody. Now, you want a document that kind of goes through that, go to JeffersonMining.com, look up Highways and Trails Doc, and you'll see some statutes, some case law that'll explain this a little better for you all. Get yourself armored up, if you will, and ammunitioned up with what you need to eventually say. You don't tell them all that. You come from that standpoint. You go in your state's laws, you find out the very same thing that says that, and you apply that to what you're talking about, and you show them that this generic application is and then utilizing tests that can be shown to be faulty is without actual due process or probable cause. Look at the setup of the takedown here, folks. I think about it a little bit, I get terrified at this. This is the kind of mentality that's in the world anymore. It never, ever used to be like this. So, the nuttiness of the corruption is on us. The reflective condition is on us. Whatever it takes to bolster the system of this police state, the military state, folks. Believe me, it's not police. It's beyond politics, okay? Police is policy. It's beyond policy. The policy is the policy of whom or of what? That the police are in second step here. But so it goes to the security of the occupying force, and there can be identified a few of them at this point, which I won't. You've heard me talk a little bit about each one of them over time, but let me show you how nuts this starts to get and what you have to start doing. That when I mentioned earlier, we have to stop empowering the state and give remedy to those harmed, is what you'll have to step up to do as well. That if they come against you, like that law, you come back and you make another initiative. If they're going to apply this pilot program and they go after and they get someone who they tell someone they wrongly indict someone or wrongly invoke, even interfere with anybody with a wrongful claim of drugs, that the people that did that go to prison because they committed a felony under color of authority. They diminished you. They used a system to diminish your capacity to use your roads. So you empower the people with a remedy, if nothing else. You don't make it a question. You don't say, oh, you get to go convicted. It is it's prima facie that they've done the harm. And they shall go to jail when it's found out. So and I would take a little bit more to write that up because you would have the right to take an independent test. Now we have to go do that too, you know. This is almost like talking back to miners where they used to have to send their assay samples out to 3 parties. Do you understand the bureaucratic imposition just alone on this? That if you sit silent, you're agreeing to all this in Michigan. And if you think that it's staying in Michigan, wow. If you listen to me at all, wow. But here's where it starts to go. They make this, I've been telling you, they make this stuff up. You can't even follow the law, actually literally follow the law and be found not guilty when they come against you. The IQ level of a cop is well, whatever they need it to be a cop. You can be too smart to be a cop. Four court cases declare that, and the Supreme Court decisions, I don't say a thing about that. That's what they've said. I agree because I see the product of that. But the sheriff's department charges a man with no drugs, but with intent to distribute counterfeit controlled substances. You cannot have now any drugs, but because now they got to cover their behind, they will continue to charge you so the state doesn't look liable. You cannot even have a controlled substance. They will show you if they make the mistake of identification and they think what you had looked like a controlled substance, it is now a counterfeit controlled substance. Even though when you tell them it's not, they still go with what they believe, and they'll get a conviction. Here's a story for it. Again, I don't know how much to read about this. Some of this is opinion, some of this is just the facts. I want you to read it for yourself, actually. This is a good enough report. There's some opinion on how this rolls out. It isn't somebody authoring the information. But the bottom line is that this guy had some rocks in his pocket in a package, in a plastic, that was a sensi, I think it's called, and it's supposed to be burned melted in a hot water in order to let the vapors come out that looked like cocaine. Because it looked like cocaine, even though it wasn't, he got charged and convicted for having a counterfeit controlled substance. Now, this has to be the Bar Association incompetence and attorneys actually running your life down, because there was a lot of ways to get around this that weren't utilized that I can see. The point is that the sheriff's department, the state, is willing to lie on you and get a conviction. We're not joking now about indicting a ham sandwich and getting a conviction. They can indict you for when the stupid cop, the too smart to be a cop level of intelligence cop, thinks you have a controlled substance. They'll get a conviction on saying it was counterfeit. It looked like it. And that's good enough. But you know what? The law's not good enough that way. Now, I'm hoping they go on if they're going to do an appeal. I don't know. But see, this is how they've violated this gentleman's rights. I think it was a gentleman. And now he's got to deal with it. And that's another felony theft by extortion, isn't it? That's never called out. I need you to know that so you can start calling this nonsense out. Those of you that hear this story that think that's nonsense, that you can be found guilty for something you haven't done because some cop says so? What did I tell you about the NSA and those FBI guys and all the people looking on the monitors over all your data, making stuff up and getting their way with you? It's not enough to say I don't violate law. They will make it a violation of law because they thought it so. And I don't know what to do on my own about this. I'm already fighting the battles that we're fighting. This should rightly tick somebody off in order to engage this. Roll your sleeves up without my suggestion on how. Grab up the evidence of this wrong and go make some of it right somewhere and then tell people about it. To me, this judge should be impeached. How he didn't protect against the fact that you can't charge for a substitute substance that doesn't exist and isn't intended. The gentleman at the stop told him what it was. He didn't explain and intend that it would be used as a counterfeit. He had a scale in his pocket. What might that be for? Well, maybe I want to make sure if I'm being sold this stuff, I don't know how to buy it, how it's bought, but maybe it's sold by the gram. I want to make sure I got what I bought, right? How come people don't make that? No, this scale was to make sure that you're interfering with my ability to perfect my contract. You have a right to impair my contract. My contract says that the contract I made, with that guy allowed me to have these scales in order to make good on our contract. Now you're interfering with my right to make contract by making it illegal for me to use my scale. Why don't people have these thoughts in their mind? Now, initially, this dumb cop, it won't matter, but at least you have this to go against the system. This guy's completely at the mercy of a merciless system. But here it is, folks. It's beyond. If they think proof, evidence, notice to you right now the way it sits, at least in this jurisdiction, and it doesn't seem to be it seems to ooze out pretty quickly in lots of other places. They can believe the cops, the so-called law enforcement, these criminals, this military execution squad, in securing themselves, can just believe you are doing something with an object, and that's good enough for a conviction. Should not be good enough for you. I see too many people that it is, though, and that's why the crickets continue to play on the broadcast. I'm attempting to bring you these points that you can take, bundle up, and go beyond what I'm suggesting, certainly, to get done what we need to be doing and be the example of how that gets done properly. There's not enough of that. We have to go get information now. We start seeing all this, and you're going to go ask for information. But you got to understand there's another thing. The battlefield is such that they don't want to be found out, and they're finding out that we are able to find them out. That should be empowering to you. But you have to learn what the battlefield's going to return to you when you attempt to engage it. So here's a word of warning, and there's a ways to deal with this, but just to know up front that Judge 6 cops on a journalist for requesting public docs has him arrested and charged. So just by going to ask information, you could be found to be violating what you have right to go do. Again, you can't even fulfill the law, and it'll be deemed by these criminals and all these racketeers or the military when it threatens them, or whoever you want it, these occupiers. They will make it difficult on you at least. In a disturbing use of state power for retaliatory purposes, make that statement, folks. A Georgia Superior Court judge initiated felony charges against a local newspaper publisher for filing an open records request. I won't go through the story. When I read that, though, folks, didn't that gentleman have the right, that journalists have the right to go get those open records? And so the felony charges instituted by a judge is a theft by extortion of his right for the information, isn't it? So not only is that be a reverse charge back on his case, I'd also do an independent one against the judge himself. But you need to know that that's there to do, and that you need to make a big stink around just trying to get a record, because they've got you down to making you guilty for even trying to find information. Now, this may be jurisdiction to jurisdiction. You may never have this problem, but you have to know that it's out there and a potential because it just happened. A journalist or anybody who asks for open records request documents and gets charged with felonies is a felony on victimization. There's a whole set of laws that you can assert back against this judge, go after him and impeach him. Or find he's malfeasance in offense, like they have like in the one constitutional state that we work through, and you have to then go after the crime in the office. No, you are going back to that system, but see, you're making notice of the problem, and you're showing people that they are not helpless against responding to it, notwithstanding you are, in this case, going back to that system. However, you recited JeffersonMining.com versus Kitzhopper, and you point out that the Bar Association agreed that they were committing treason to deny people's rights. You can take that judge out, and you can take out that whole Bar Association. They have agreed they will interfere and commit felony and treason to stop you and to destroy the Republican form of representative government. So to me, it's not a question anymore. I have the case. I've got the default agreement, the confession from them that they do so. That this judge is, on paper at least, again, and then you go to the sheriff and you say, listen, are you going to arrest this guy for the felony theft by extortion he's committed to keep me from getting my records? and the system he's invoked against me and to defame my character? Or are you part of the problem too, Sheriff? Well, that's a 50-50 shot that you didn't have before, isn't it? And so the sheriff makes his decision. He's going to enforce the law, or he's going to show himself to be a usurper in the office. And you go after that. That's why it kind of helps to have some people. Because I'm telling you, these criminals are everywhere, whether they understand they're a criminal or not. But my point here is that you don't come without a remedy. You enforce whether or not someone's going to recognize it, who you find out's a criminal. They're not going to recognize any of this stuff. Why would you expect it? And so when you don't, you just type away, they're just going to ignore you. And then you do nothing more? You're an accessory to the felony. But this is what you have, those of you that are working in the field, this is what you don't, I wouldn't push for it. I mean, just do your paperwork the way you have to do it. It's not something that's been happening too much before. There was some resistance. Most of the time it's inside the system not wanting to give you the documentation. This is one of the first evidences of an overt criminal charge by an officer that was under scrutiny. And I want you to know that that's a potential, and then give you some ideas on where you might start looking for the remedy, and get that ready in your mind, because that's being able to come back real quick against them with what I'm suggesting to you, and there's more, is a real big club, because they don't understand anybody can do this. No one has, let alone actually been refining it. So power to the people, if I can say it that way. But it takes you to be out there. You're going to be out there, and you're going to be under attack. In other words, what do they say? That if you're getting flack, you must be over the target. Absolutely, but you can't be just taking flack without protection. And so I want to come, bring you behind the woodshed, teach you these principles that they weren't telling you that are available. Again, always your mileage will vary versus the criminal conspiracy. I mean, when you go up against the mafia, what would you expect? It's going to be tough. Now, I understand there's some guy in Italy that goes up against the mafia all the time. He's still going up against the mafia. So it's not like because you go up against them, you die. You might survive. And you get to be that witness again. So as it turns down, and I told you before, your property's not your own, and the courts were going to turn down to be the internationalists, occupiers that they are. We have another evidence now. It comes out, court says there's no remedy for a person whose vehicle was subjected to civil forfeiture after an illegal search. And I don't want to bore you with all the details, but the remedy of the criminal side exclusion was not offered to this gentleman named Miguel Herrera for his attempt to rid his case of the evidence against him because of the illegal search on a civil forfeiture case. The problem with my view, which isn't stated in this article, you need to see how it lays out, was, and remember, they're saying you have no remedy for an illegal search. In other words, the state can make an illegal search if they claim you did some kind of an act that it really essentially becomes an admiralty case that you don't respond to correctly, but let's put it less obscure. When the government comes and says you did an illegal act, but the act of their search was illegal, you have no remedy against that illegal search to have your stuff returned. Because the Bar Association judges just extended to the state the all-important, omnipresent, omnipotent possession of the people greater than the private party who has the property. Now, my objection to this, and what needs to be looked at by somebody and addressed, was you're seeing the failure of the Supreme Court of Texas to be the court of law, where they combined a criminal interpretation with a civil Rule 59, what they say Rule 59 statement that's unconnected to each other, and they convolute the conversation to say that because the rule doesn't provide a remedy, then Herrera has none, and the state can take his stuff because it's a greater good that the state's doing to stop drugs. Now, I say stop drugs, but the court fails again to show there was a conviction on that fact. And this is where the whole thing falls apart. Because had they used Rule 59 in context of of the criminal statute, where Rule 59 talks to the actual commission. They would have necessarily had to connect Rule 59 to a conviction in order to allow the failure of the remedy. In other words, when you were convicted, then you couldn't have remedy of return for the exclusion. Now, the problem here where Texas became no longer lawful was that they continued to move into a decision that allowed the final answer to be a lack of remedy to someone harmed. That was my focus. This decision, however they came to it, allows for someone to be harmed and have no remedy to it. What's the problem with that, folks? Is anybody thinking way back to that one case, Kansas versus Colorado? Did anybody trigger at all? Remember, I told you early on in the broadcast that you in all your constitutions you should see a place that says that every man has a remedy for harm done him. When the Constitutional Court of Texas, or the Court of Texas, said that they agreed to take away that gentleman's property and not allow him remedy, what have they done? What have they just done? Besides a constitutional violation, what have they just done in function? Let me go back to Kansas versus Colorado. Hope that popped in your mind. 1907. This case just kind of rings in my head all the time when I'm reading this stuff. And this is about a water law case between Colorado and Kansas. And no, Toto doesn't have a part to play in this one. But notwithstanding that, what is common law? Kent says, Volume 1, page 471, out of the opinion. Kansas versus Colorado, 1907. Quote, the common law includes those principles, usages, and rules of action applicable to the government and security of persons and property, which do not rest on their authority upon an express and positive declaration of the will of the legislature, close quote. So everything common law isn't even been defined as judge-made law here in this case in 1907. How much that has changed. Keep track of that, but continue to listen here. As it does not rest on any statute or written declaration of the sovereign, there must, as to each principle thereof, be a first statement. Those statements are found in the decisions of the courts. And the first statement presents the principle of as certainly as the last. So now he adds, in the comment of the judge upon the statement of what is the common law as described by Kent, he adds the courts make the common law in the first decision they make. We're seeing a definition set here. Whatever you think your definition is, this is how they go through and they rule it. So you got to follow this stuff. You don't play it the way you want, you play it the way they want, and then you move from there to show how what they want wasn't right or good enough. That's the only way I know how to do it right now. The statements are found in those decisions of the courts, so it's judge-made law. Now you understand when I talk about how the power of a trade union sitting in the seats of decision is when their business is nothing but to make those decisions. Cha-ching, folks. But get back to the point here. Multiplication of declarations merely adds certainty. Okay, there's what I was telling you about declaration. Make have a declaratory order that's issued on your cases. Injunctions and declaratory judgments are in one section of the law. Multiplication of declarations merely adds certainty. What did I say about making certain questions that all roll up together to be a certain statement that you conform your case and your rights to? Your case and your rights, not theirs on your collateral questions. On your direct questions. Attacking collaterally what the state tends to do, like in Michigan. But that's not even the point. This is important stuff, but it's not even the point I'm going to get to. For after all, the common law is but the accumulated expression of the various judicial tribunals in their efforts to ascertain what is right and just between individuals in respect of private disputes. I didn't realize I was going to stop so much. Is it, though, folks? That's not true. Not individuals. It could be corporations now. It could be the state against its own entities, its agencies now, right? So this is 1907. You have to remember with the context of this as well. But let's read the underlying. I'm reading for the underlying law. What is common law? Where am I going when I was talking about Texas not providing a remedy? I hope you're advancing what I've told you back when I talked about this case, about the definiteness in this statement about why we have the courts and what happens when they don't exist. In other words, when you don't have a remedy. As Congress cannot make compacts between the states, as it cannot in respects of certain matters, by legislation compel their separate action, disputes between them must be settled either by force or else by appeal to the tribunals empowered to determine the right and wrong thereof. So the only two things you have here to remedy your disputes is by force or appeal to a tribunal. That's what we're reduced to in all of our system. And here's the statement of power here. Force. Remember now, they do enforcement. Force, under our system of government, is eliminated. The clear language of the Constitution vests in the court of power to settle those disputes. We have exercised that power in a variety of instances, determining at several instances the justice of the dispute. Nor is our jurisdiction ousted, even if, because Kansas and Colorado are state sovereigns and independent in local matters, the relations between them depend in any respect upon principles of international law. International law is no alien in this tribunal. We're talking about the Supreme Court of the United States of America as between the states. International law is no alien. What I've been telling you, you have to regard international law. And now I want you to jump and think, what's the international law? Well, we're going to talk about here, where force becomes their only option. International law is part of our law and must be ascertained and administered by the courts of justice of appropriate jurisdiction. Two conditions right there, folks. As often as questions of right depend upon it are duly presented for their determination. Powerful, powerful statement right there. It really clears, for me anyway, clears up a whole lot of things. What have I talked to you about? The international law, and they talk that force is eliminated where we have the courts. You just heard that. In our system of government, force is eliminated. Why? Because we have access to the courts and courts of justice. Not just us, and not by just cause, but courts of justice. Now, I've asked you before to question the reality that you have. When you see a court case come down that takes away a remedy for you, that says it's constitutional that every man shall have right of remedy for harm done him, and they take away the remedy on an illegal act, folks, of a takings of property. First of all, did your mind go to Title 42, Section 1981, your civil rights? Title 42, Section 1981, your civil rights, where you have the right to pay exactions of every kind and no other, and exactions are the wrongful extortion of property. Isn't this in the definition of the Texas case of the wrongful extortion or expropriation of or this man's property? To show you he's suffering, because he hasn't stopped it, he's suffering civil rights. But what's more important about this? When he doesn't have a remedy for that, he's not living under a constitutional concept, is he? Or limited form where the government protects that property. He's thrown into a place where he has no court. And didn't Kansas, Colorado state that the courts are what eliminates force? And so let's go to that force. Where are you seeing that force being applied but universally anymore? Cops executing anybody they want, whatever they want to say, even with positions they don't even understand. I don't know why I shot the guy. We'll get to that maybe. Force and no justice coming down. Force and you just have to do what we say, and you will show up. And if you don't show up, we're going to put you in a cage. Force, folks. The The imposition of force was to be eliminated by the courts. When you see force around you in a government that was supposed to be limited to keep the peace, am I starting to approach in your mind now that maybe you should really be reassessing, as I'm suggesting, the kind of reality you're really living, that when you see force, you've just taken yourself outside of the ability and you've gone extrajudicial. You didn't even have to have the government declare it in the memo to the NDAA 2014. You're extrajudicial, you don't have a remedy, and the Texas case just declared that for Miguel. That goes for you. In a situation they can invent anything, and they can make an illegal confiscation, you have no remedy against that. And part of the problem is the court failed to make the connection in Rule 59 of Texas that made the comment about it being implying at least, and strongly, that there was a conviction for a criminal act, not just the suggestion. That when we look at this use of force on us, we have to necessarily agree to our detriment and peril if we don't, and our irrationality and just a clear thinking mind. That when you see force being executed in the first thing, especially where people are executed, you don't live in a constitutional republic anymore, and you are to keep it. First two, that's two notices to you. But what does that mean when force is now the go-to go-to tool? Let me remind you of international law. What Kansas, Colorado says is always part of the discussion. What, folks? What do I return to all the time under international law? And it's at the bottom of my Blogcaster page for those of you that care to go look at it and have read it. I've talked about it. I read it. I've read this a long time ago. We go to where? I really wish I was more interactive with the chats, because I'd really like to see who's listening, who's paying attention. Are you putting the stuff together? It's not that hard. If you're putting it together as fast as I'm talking, wow, man, we really have a dynamite amount of people that can work this. If we are not, where are we, folks, if you can't put this stuff together? Immediate, real time. I can't tell you I didn't think about this, but I didn't think about this. It didn't take any more time to think about how I'm telling you about it right now than just seeing the titles and saying, oh, wow, this means that, and that means this, and this means this. It's taken me a whole lot longer time to tell you about it. That if it doesn't, these things don't come to you this quick, we are in a lot of trouble because those that are implementing this already know and implement it. Let me go to the international law. Where is that international law that's always a part of our law? But the Hague Convention in 1907. Seems to happen to be 1914 or 19. Oh, excuse me. I think it's 1907. I think another one happened in 1914. But interestingly, Kansas, Colorado is right here, speaking to international law. Hague Convention was what? In 1907, I think it was. Wasn't that the adoption of the Lieber Code? Let me go to that code. Everyone thinks you have to have martial law declared, and I keep telling you to go read it. You say it doesn't matter. You don't have to. I'm telling you it's what they do, not what they say. You know them by their deeds, folks. Let me go back and refresh you. I'll read the first 3 or 4 here. See if you don't hear what Texas just did and what they're doing all the time. When you live in a world that force is a tool, in the inverse of 1907's opinion, you no longer live in this country that he's talking about. When force is the first rule applied. They force you to take saliva. They force you to pull over. They force you to present information. They force you to comply. They force you here. They force you there. And you're crickets. And I'm trying to show you a context. Now I'm starting to feel like in myself, I'm starting to feel a taskmaster now coming. And the switch is a-flying. But at any rate, back off. I'll back off a bit just to let you think about this. I hope you're thinking about it. To me, it's so clear, and people dismiss this. It doesn't even have to be this, but this is what you're living in. And what you're living in is described by a document that was printed back in the 1860s, about the time of your civil rights imposition. Should be important. I found it important. So let's get to the Article 1. A place, district, or country occupied by an enemy stands in consequence of the occupation under martial law of the invading or occupying army whether any proclamation declaring martial law or any public warning to the inhabitants has been issued or not. Martial law is the immediate and direct effect and consequence of occupation and conquest. The presence of the hostile army proclaims its martial law. When you don't have resort to remedy through a limited form of constitutional government, and the state of Texas so-called judiciary says you don't have a remedy, aren't they declaring that you no longer live underneath your constitutional republic, all you patriot flag wavers? The occupier is all-powerful. I don't care if they call it the state. The name they call it is no matter to me. It's what does this entity that I can identify do in the world? And if it's overthrown your life and overthrown your expectations, it is a martial law. Number 2, Article 2, martial law does not cease during the hostile occupation except by special proclamation ordered by the commander-in-chief or by special mention in the Treaty of Peace concluding the war, when the occupation of a place or territory continues beyond the conclusion of peace as one of the conditions of the same. Did you go find those parts that stopped all this, folks? I never have. Number 3, martial law in a hostile country consists of in suspension by the occupying military authority of the criminal and civil law. Suspension of the criminal and civil law. Texas just divorced the civil from the criminal. It also then applied the civil, the failure of a remedy in the civil over the criminal and not applicable, completely destroying the connection and nexus between the state required and a burden to prove and not alienate you from your property. Talk about alienation, not alienation. Alienation of property. They put a bills of pain and suffering on you. They have created this by that decision, that there is a suspension of the criminal and civil law, although they impose upon you a criminal and civil law, a penal law, that's admiralty, and of domestic administration and government in the occupied place or territory, and in the substitution of military rule and force for the same. Kansas, Colorado said that in our system, which is the constitutional system, force is eliminated. That's not so under martial law. When you see force, you're necessarily seeing martial law, whether it's declared or not. Substitution of military rule. What did I tell you when they came in 1953? The Bar Association substituted the permanent laws of the people for the Model Business Corporation Act. If that's not clear enough to you, I don't know what else I can say. That's a supplantation, the supplantation, underneath international law. That's all you're going to get is soup and your plantation work, right? You're just going to be the slave. The supplantation of the permanent laws of the people. Or dictation. So you're in a dictatorship. Military rule enforced by the same. Occupied place or territory in the substitution of military rule and force for the same. Declares that you're in a non-constitutional reality. As well as the dictation of general laws, as well as military necessity requires the suspension, substitution, or dictation, is what Texas just did, eliminating a man's remedy. Why? Because to do so would interfere with the security that's the theft of the property which supports the military troops, which are the cops. Number 3, going on, the commander of the forces may proclaim that the administration of the civil and penal law shall continue, even wholly or in part, in times of peace, unless otherwise ordered by the military authority. And I've told you that in that provision, that clause, how could you look at any civil authority and realize that you're not subject to military rule? My view is it's impossible. You're looking at a spaghetti western false front. I've talked about this before. Nothing's new here. Why? Because I'm just returning to a document that's been sitting around since 1907, adopted in international law, which international law is part of the Supreme Court's determinations. And how, if you look through this, they're talking about what happened to us in the United States of America till today. Why? And partly because when you see force being applied without going resort to the judiciary, or the judiciary is forceful, in other words, the judges come out and attack you for asking for documentation, that is evidence that you don't live in a limited form government. You live in some other place, and I am asking you, if I can say pleading with you, identify what that is. And when you find out what that is, my only finding on that is you have to respond to it. It's not my rule. It also seems to be the reality as well and the truth of it. That you respond to it, otherwise you are destroyed or oppressed by it. And look at us. In Article 4, and I think this is about where I'm going to stop. Martial law is simply military authority exercised in accordance with the laws and usages of war. Military oppression is not martial law. It's the abuse of the power which the law confers. As martial law is executed by military force, it is incumbent upon those who administer it to strictly guided by principles of justice, honor, and humanities, virtues adorning a soldier even more than other men, for the very reason that he possesses the power of his arms against the unarmed. You have a right to bear arms. They try to strip you, but this is all flowery words. What's the administration and strictly guided principles of justice and honor and humanity under the law of war, death and destruction and plunder if I need to, for my purposes? Now let's go back. Didn't Texas just do that? Didn't they just explain to us that it's okay because they didn't check it? They had the inherent power in a constitutional limited form of representative government to check the excesses of the legislature and say, no, you can't be interpreting Rule 59 to be without the conviction of the criminal side. And that because Rule 59 doesn't allow that, and we come to the remedy, a failure of a remedy to a man that's harmed, we are going to rule this rule and this law unconstitutional for the sake of this case. If they would have said it that way, given the legislature the chance to fix that breach, to maintain remedy to someone who suffered underneath civil rights and suffers under it, then they would have argued against what I've been saying, and they would have proven against what I said, but they didn't. They proved what I've been telling you. We live underneath the exactions of every kind and no other. They proved that even though you have a constitutional right to remedy, they can remove it. When they can do that to their security, which they do when they keep the property to the so-called police, they have defined by deed that they are under martial law, that you are under martial law. They are implementing it. I don't know how many more times I can read this to make this proof. And all these years, no one has ever been able to show that my interpretation was even a hair off. And I'll have to say, the likes of the research intent, the concentrated research that Clint Richardson has done on this has not thrown out that this is, there's nothing more to say. There's nothing that's not working here. He has not been able to destroy a little bit of this interpretation. I'm just reading the black and white, folks. I will still leave open the fact that it's not the thing going, but when I can go through the news, it's a notice, and they're telling us these things, and I can't help but bring these proofs of black and white that pre-existed all of us into this idea, into this discussion. It's striking. It's scary in a way, but it's certainly striking. They also hear, let me do one more thing. Martial law should be less stringent in places and countries fully occupied and fairly conquered. Much greater severity may be exercised in places and regions where actual hostilities against. Look what's going on in this country, where those of you that comply, they leave you alone. Those of you who want to get a little bit uppity, they're going to bring the military to you. Right? They're going to bring the military to you. So this other guy asking for the records, he gets thrown out with a felony. Why? Because it's going to expose this military consequence that the soldiers of which are the Bar Association. And the guy has another action on top, because just at the same time I was going to talk to you a while back about this condition of the records request, was that Obama signed an expansion of the Freedom of Information Act, which is federal. Records requests are state. FOIA is federal. Apparently, there's an action to try and bring transparency, and you know that means they're even though they're trying to give you better access, that they're making it so you're not going to be able to get so much. The point is that in the same relative time, this judge is beating down on someone a journalist for getting information that's going to expose the judge, the troop, one of the troops of the officers of the military oppression that's on the people. The other commander-in-chief says, no, go ahead and give him the information. Now, to me, these were two evidences for that guy to go and really rake these people over the coals. I don't know if people understand that. I certainly don't think he listens behind the woodshed. Again, this is where we would get together, we could start passing this information around. But by going through Kansas, Colorado to say that force is eliminated, folks, that's a big word, eliminated. When it references the courts as being it's really the Civil War forum that stops the cessation of hostilities was done in the courts. And the Bar Association has taken control to bring them as an adversarial forum should have been a clue. It's still a hostile venue. Why? It's supposed to be a place of peace and conclusion in a more civilized manner, more understandable and less violent way. That they've usurped that as well. That Kansas, Colorado says when you see force has not been eliminated. You're not in this country, the one they're talking about. You're not in this country. I say country very particularly. Country is this countryside. It's not the rural and urban environment, which is fabricated. All these things are critical. You want to get into dialogue and you want to get into terminology, use the one that's being used today and the way it's being used so you can at least sound like you know how to apply some of this stuff. It's very important to get that organized in your head to be able to do so. But it's not impossible either. It's all right there to do. So at the same time, the commander-in-chief says, give them the records. We have a judge. We have an officer in a district who's destroying somebody, going after somebody, and the local cops are okay with that. As soon as they impose force and not reason and justice through a rule set that we can agree is just, for the most part comes to just outcomes, you are no longer living in a constitutional republic under civil authority. It's that clear, folks. And we were told in 2014 it was over through that memo. They said, we're going extrajudicial, and that's international. Well, that's a reflection of 1907. International law always affords recognition in the courts of the United States, be they of the occupier or of the constitutionally established government and its functions. And so this military has a presence, and that's declaring martial law. It's not military oppression underneath the laws of war, and so they get away with murder. Or maybe just a little bit less. I told you can't even follow the law. You can't, my first integration in this 3 decades ago was a cop pulling me over for a fabricated so-called traffic charge. And when he got me out, I got out of the car. At the time, it was get out of the car. The Supreme Court was saying get out of the car so they can see your hands, so they don't think you're going to hurt them. So I got out of the car, and all of a sudden he didn't want me out of the car. Now I've got to go in the car. Then he wants me to stand up. Then he wants to sit down. Then he wants to spread my legs. All this nonsense come out of him real fast. And I told him, shut up and tell me one thing. Well, I didn't know at the time how close I was to getting a bullet, and then all of a sudden I saw 5 guns pointing at me. So I was very, very, very close. It just didn't happen that day, which did not. The guy 6 months later wasn't so lucky. He got 23 in the back, trying to go seek help from the state troopers. So this long-term discussion and view I have says at some point I told you you're not going to be able to even surrender. They're going to still shoot you. Here's the story. We've heard this before. Again, cops shoot unarmed caregiver with his hands up while he helps a man, and the man was autistic. A North Miami behavior therapist trying to help a patient with autism says he was shot in the leg by cops responding to the scene even after he laid down on the pavement and put his hands in the air. The upshot of all this, he asked, after being shot, folks, you would understand this, what's going on. After being shot, he asked the cop, why'd you shoot me? And the answer from the cop was, I don't know. Right there, folks, we have IQ 80 minus right there. 80 minus in that cop. I don't know why I shot you. What you do have is a military execution troop who really shouldn't even be there. because there is limits to some of this nonsense, and it didn't, this guy actually surpassed what the laws of war would allow, which the bar of that is even being dropped. I will wait to see how this guy who proclaims he did not know, the IQ 80 minus Neanderthal with a gun, shoots someone taking care of somebody else, and he don't know why he pulls the trigger. You folks in that area better keep track that he gets removed. Otherwise, be careful who else you have that's IQ 80 minus. You can't even give up anymore, folks. Where did we come to this? How fast it came for me, but how blind everybody is to this, that they'll agree, people agree that's kind of okay. I didn't see anybody foam at the mouth at that and run into the government to say that's going to stop, period. That guy gets removed, and anybody else that has that idea, you don't bring them up to 100 IQ at least, they're out, and if they don't bring it to 100 IQ and do better, stop making force as the first tool, make justice in the courts, and by the way, we got to clean those up, but first get them into court, don't shoot people. Until we get the voice, the action to start, to get that done, we're going to see a whole lot more, and this condition is going to be used by the government, by the commander-in-chief, and to exploit these divisions. Forget the black and white division here. I'm talking the division between you and the occupying force. Please don't mistake what I'm saying here. Police, Georgia's, again, another top of the list here. Georgia cops tased the wrong man. Police had a warrant for one man, but body cam footage reveals they repeatedly tased the wrong guy before they realized their error. And folks, they don't care. They don't care. They wanted to know why he didn't comply quicker. Luckily, it wasn't a bunch of bullets flying into the guy, right? But see, that's you're a hair's breadth between this and that military execution squad that's out there. Has no sense of law at all. There's none in these people. Why? Because the Supreme Court of Texas is evidence that the courts will say you will suffer exactions of every kind and no other. I'm telling you, this is right in the law. It's been in the law. They're just finally letting you know about it. And the Constitutional Court would have said the disconnect between Rule 59 and the Criminal Code for purposes of state forfeiture was broken when there was no remedy made, and the requirement under Rule 59 was to a conviction. In other words, if you don't get a conviction, stop stealing people's stuff, rightly or wrongly taken. How's that one? See, this is the other thing that kind of misses the point, at any rate. So, we have this discussion where you could be the wrong guy. Like synthetic drug. You don't even have to be the thing that they're after. They're not even contraband. They just make it up that you're the guy they want. They just tase you, and they don't care. And they will give you an apology, and they will do nothing. And then these cops want to know why they get beat down. I mean, why they're going to get shot. I don't know. I don't like that idea. I don't like that it's happening, but it's coming to the point. For as much as I would disagree with his position, the name slipped from my mind. The title of his article was "When is it time to shoot a cop?" or something similar to that. Larkin Rose. When's it time to shoot a cop? I think we're coming and seeing that time. Why? Because we have judiciary bar members that do things like Texas that take away your remedy and insist on the peace being the first option. When you don't have peace as the first option, when you have, well, listen to what I just said, when peace is not the first option, and your sheriff is duty bound to keep the peace, you can't say you live in a constitutional republic of limited function in the government, limited scope of the government. You can't say that. When they breach the peace, and that's okay, that's in the laws of war to secure the soldiers, secure the occupation. I don't know how you can't look at this and just disregard it, not really think, wait a minute, we really got some different problems than we've been told. Yeah, all this division they're putting in us and all these things they do, yeah, that's just eye candy and mind-numbing stuff as well. We really have to grow up, get our big boy and big girl pants on and do some really big work here. they will shoot me, and I'm just the wrong guy. How many times have we had that? They go in the wrong warrant to the wrong house. They shoot your dog. They just did it again. And it's okay. When did that become okay is when you finally realize that you lived in an occupied country. That's when it's okay. No, it's not okay, but the laws of war say it's okay. And so I ask you again, when the civil authority can be ordered to be in existence, and they're ordered to keep shut up, whether or not they're actually an occupying force themselves that will shut up. Do you live in your limited form? Can you expect justice or just us? Is it just cause or just 'cause? And when you make your line, you take your piece of paper and you draw your list of things that you would expect in a constitutional republic and what you're experiencing, and you have your line down the middle, and you put your check marks where you find them, and you have a bunch of check marks on the side of force and destruction and control and theft and plunder, I'm not sure how you can continue in your thought pattern and sit back about it when you know that by sitting back you're allowing it. You're an accessory to the crime against everybody else, and you are duty bound to throw it off, or they take it as your agreement. Another story pops up about this Philando Castile discussion, Minneapolis, with a guy that got shot, and we got the video in the car, however that was, real or not. I think it was real enough. Haven't heard much about that. It could be all false. I don't really care anymore. I'm looking at what does it tell me. The story comes out to tell us what it's going to tell me. How Castile told officers about gun is critical in the final moments. And this is an article you need to see. All these pictures of the funeral and all this. Nice horse-drawn carriage and all. Talking of making lots of picture about and discussion to try and entice you into the fact of the title, which says that there was a particular way to talk to the military officers that came on him about his gun. Now, I took a soft offense to that only for a couple reasons. One is that they're trying to tell you how to act now. You know, a right to bear arms shouldn't have a particular way to explain that, and there shouldn't be a surprise to the cops because it's they have taken an oath to honor the fact that you will be armed to defend yourself and against usurpers of that government. But this little story comes out to tell you that had he done it like he was trained to say it instead of how he said it, and then exposed that his girlfriend actually tried to correct how he ought to say it properly, shows you, I want you to read this as an infringement on your right to bear arms, that if you don't look just right, you don't have just the right phraseology, you don't have just that, is proof of two things. One is that you have a military infringement on the right, which means you probably don't have the right. And one, you're not standing up against that infringement. If you have to say things just right, do you live underneath the right to bear arms? And if you don't, what world do you live in? That I'm going to suggest you read the article to explain so you understand what that cop, the 80 IQ plus cop, is listening for. That if you don't say it, just tell this android just right, he's liable to shoot you dead. Well, there's no guarantees, but I mean, you better say it just right, you slave. If that doesn't bother you or just kind of get you riled up, I don't know what to rile you up with. These things to me are fundamental violations that these other people in uniforms and costumes had no right to do, and they secreted themselves in on us, and they're doing it. So this story was, one, a lesson. It tells you how you have to communicate to these cops. It's what they listen to. They're so brain dead. They're so trained and inculcated that if they don't hear like a bot, if they don't hear exactly the syntax exactly right, they're going to have a malfunction and shoot you. On the other hand, what about that? Why is it that this is so constrained that they can only listen to the right words and not honor what their oath said that they would honor, which is an uninfringed right in the first instance? Not force, not terminology, but a recognition and acknowledgement of an uninfringible right, if I can call it even a right. To me, that's more of a property, but that's notwithstanding. So they're conforming. This article tries to get you to conform, show you need to be registered, and show you need to take training, and show you have to say the right things, or else you're going to get shot. And then all the story tells you, oh, well, yeah, he didn't say it right. I guess he deserved to get shot. Now, wait a minute now. No one goes beyond this. I'm saying, wait a minute. You better rethink that. This is in your reality. This could happen to you. They try to make it black and white, but whites are dying too. All this same stupidity. The occupying force, is, particularly if it's the Bar Association imposition, it is colorblind. Remember, it tells you they're also gender neutral. They'll violate everybody. They're an equal opportunity offender and plunderer. And when they hurt you, they don't care. They don't care to come back and be respectful. Go back to the Dallas thing. Black open carry activist flees death threats after Dallas police wrongly accused him of mass shooting. So this guy was there. He got named. The police called him out, not so rightly. And when he went to ask for an apology, they wouldn't even talk to him. And because they wouldn't help to fix the defamation and the violence that was going to come against him, he had to flee the state. Why? Because the military could care less about helping you, and they chuckle and laugh about violating you. That's one more activist they got rid of, isn't it? From their standpoint, it's all within. They didn't hurt anybody to get that to happen. But you think peacefulness and decency in people would provide a remedy to that man. He didn't have it. He had to flee the territory. When you live in a government that allows force and violence to come on you without remedy, what does the Kansas versus Colorado case say? It says you're not in this country. The United States of America, as we would know, was subject to a limited form of representative government that protects your peace and your dignity and your property and your livelihood and your life. And so there's a whole set of stories here that show that we do not live in that world. And the more I see this, the more astonished I am that there's so many crickets to this day. And so many that would say, oh, I'm not going to deal with it. I'll just ignore it. Well, you can, and you might get out, but someone else is dying somewhere. And there's no sense to any of it. And then one day you get a traffic ticket, and they do whatever they're going to do, and it costs you a couple $1,000s now if you're that lucky. And you just get all pissed off, and we hear it in the chat, and then off you go, keep talking. Oh, I just paid them and screw them and F them and all this other stuff. That's not helping. That was an opportunity they gave you to get in their face, and in the more proper way, like I'm seeing can be done. I get a lot of people that don't want to listen to what I have to say. Or you don't know what you're talking about. Oh, it's not your way. You don't have the right interpretation. This and that. Not one person can come against me on any of the stuff I'm telling you, and not one has really done it either. And those that have claimed to have done it, I listened to for I don't think it's more than 3 minutes, and I'm full of error. I find full of errors what they think that they're doing. And then I have the other evidence that those that I work with that do it more correctly, we don't have those problems. That's the only thing I can go off of. So it's not just the United States, the globe, the whole world is working against your rights, your property rights, your right to defend yourself in the first instance. 4 years in jail, damages, Finnish man sentenced after defending against home invasion. Do you think that the Finns are subject to the Bar Association, folks? I'm going to, just based on this, the title of this thing, I'm going to say, and I didn't research it, you can find me wrong on this one, I can find my, kind of trip on my tongue over this one. I will bet you go to Finland and you'll find that the Bar Association, or the International Bar Association, has something to do with their legal network. That the man defending himself against 3 home robbers got put in jail for a longer time than the robbers did. Should tell you that worldwide, the people that want to impose rule of law and democracy don't care about you. They don't care about your property, about you protecting it, about you being defending yourself. They don't even have a standard here. The man opened the door to find somebody. 3 people, one of them with a gun, ran to his kitchen, brought out a knife, and successfully defended himself. Put some hurt on him. And so now he's liable for $23,000 and 4 years in jail. While the attackers, I think, got a year in jail or something each. Punishment. That's not much punishment, folks. This is the world you're walking into. When you have this kind of thing, when injustice like this, do you live in a place of peace and tranquility? I can't believe that you do. And if you don't, why? Why do you continue to allow it? That's just a rhetorical question. I wouldn't even know why you would continue to allow it like that. We didn't hear the uprising of the people. Every homeowner, everybody who even has a lease, stepping up and saying, "Wait a minute, I have a right to defend myself, and I have a right to defend myself whatever it takes." This problem is a global problem. All peoples are subject to this oppression. There's a reasoning that's kind of failed in us that we've somehow allowed to continue to allow others to take advantage of. I found this next statement based on the interaction with cops. Refusing a search is a right, not a provocation. Was something that an 80 IQ cop can't understand. A 100 IQ cop can't understand it because they're shooting people all the time. I don't care how good-natured the cops are. They apparently cannot understand when you are trying to refuse their offer of involvement, that they take that as a provocation. Now, if they were a peace officer, again, to me this is a brilliant title. I just found good, solid connection with this. That when you're, and then tied over to what I'm bringing today. When you talk to someone who takes everything you say against what they say as a provocation, you can't agree that's a peaceful environment, or that they coexist with you, that they foster a peaceful environment, that they certainly cannot call themselves a peace officer, that they certainly then cannot be also invoking the law. There's not even community caretaking when they take every refusal as a provocation. When they take your refusal, your lawful refusal, as a provocation, I'm going to suggest to you that that was the initial crime on their part, under their oath, of the having no warrant in law to not accept your refusal and to turn it into a provocation for their authority is a felony theft by extortion. But Texas says even their illegal acts can steal from you. And you have no remedy to that. So think about that in the world. Think about what's going on. Think about how this is all working out when you also find that the White House moves to reauthorize military equipment for the police. Reauthorize military equipment for the police, folks. What have I been saying? You cannot attach the military equipment to the police without them being military. This is coming from the Commander-in-Chief. If you're not seeing we live in an occupied territory in the minimum, or if we are an occupied people, we have a military consequence to this whole world, even over to Finland, where the rule of law and democracy imposes itself on everybody to their detriment. And you don't stand up and work against it, you are suffering. You're going to be the next one to suffer when it's your time, or you're bad. The stars aren't in alignment. Think about that. I think you need to act before the evidence is before us in the news, what I call the notice, the nudist now, I guess. Thank you very much for tuning in today. I hope something I said today gets you, hopefully inspired, really. And to do something, markonthebeastyahoo.com for any contributions, and donations, whatever you want to bring my way to see and read and interact with. Thank you, Grimner of reallibertymedia.com, and for the Blogcaster page and the archives. To all y'all, it's free. It's on Grimner and the people that donate to him, and Jules, UCY.tv. Thank you very much. freedomsnetwork.com social network, and the terrestrial broadcaster. Thank you for just beaming that out. And anybody else who wants to try and get the podcasts to be broadcast or even simulcast by a broadcaster anywhere, or any radio or on an internet, please donate that information to them. Take care. I'll be back. Tech Diffs and Nature Will. Well, that's another lesson. I hope with today's information you can take it to those that misbehave. From behind the woodshed, leaving his mark on the beast, this is Hal Anthony. Till next time, journey with purpose.
That's what opening up a can of whoop-ass feels like.
Son, you just opened a whole case of whoop-ass.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening